Welcome to today's webinar, Elevating Feedback, a course preview. I'm Jack Zenger, and I'm here with my colleague, Jill Mancini. And yes, you've got it right. This is indeed the Jack and Jill Show. With us today is Jennifer Lambert, our Senior Account Executive, who will be managing our chat host. She'll be our chat host. So if you have questions that you'd like answers to, feel free to type them in the chat box, and she will do her best to tell you about them. So Jill, let me turn the mic to you and have you tell everyone a bit about the firm and the research that we've been doing on this topic.
I'm happy to do that, Jack. Thank you, and welcome everyone. Zenger-Folkman's work brings together science to the art of leadership. And in one of our more extensive leadership projects, we dug deeply into our rich database to figure out what it is that differentiates the top 10% of leaders from the bottom 10% of leaders. And the goal was to define what exactly it is that differentiated the best leaders. This kind of work is at the foundation of Zenger-Folkman's insight-driven, strengths-based approach. And more recently, we did a study that's apropos of our topic today that looked at 3,400 leaders in the last 2 years. And our goal was to discern the impact that this fundamental change in the way we work has had on leadership. And we focused really specifically on two behaviors: how leaders ask for feedback. So are they actively looking for opportunities to get feedback? And are they giving feedback in a helpful way? And to help analyze those insights, leaders were divided into the top quartile and the bottom quartile. And I have a few interesting results to share with you. The first is around employee engagement. Engagement is a key measure of the impact a leader has on direct reports. And as you look at this slide, you can see on the vertical axis, the leaders who participated in the study, what was the employee engagement percentile? And then across the horizontal axis, what impact did whether or not they were in the bottom quartile or the top quartile have on their employees' engagement? And the key learning here is that those in the top quartile have double the engagement of those in the bottom quartile. And this is a meaningful difference, especially as organizations strive to keep employees engaged as expectations are changing. Another finding really relates to the Great Resignation and the increased rate of retirement. This puts organizations at risk for losing talent, making this metric really important. And again, the research showed that those in the bottom quartile had more employees who expressed that they were thinking about leaving the organization than those in the top quartile. And in normal times, we find that half of those who answer affirmatively leave within 12 months. These aren't normal times, and keeping talent is absolutely a competitive advantage. In one more look at the data, we recognize that leaders in the top quartile had a significant impact on their team members willing to go the extra mile. And in a time when teams are smaller and it's more difficult to hire, this really does make a difference to organizations and their ability to fulfill their mission. In fact, Joe found through the research that the ability to ask for feedback, or the willingness to ask for feedback, and the ability to give honest feedback helpfully impacted so many of the leadership behaviors that we find to be differentiating. So no surprise to learn that people want to know what they're doing well and what they can do to improve. They want feedback in order to do their best work, yet this remains one of the most avoided leadership behaviors. And in a second, Jack's going to talk about some reasons why that might be the case. And we do find that often it's because they are just not confident, they're just not good at it. So after Jack has a chance to share his findings, I'll circle back to talk about elevating feedback and how that might help. So as Jack speaks, Jennifer's there to answer chat. So please put your questions in chat, and we promise that we'll get back to you with an answer, if not during the webinar, then shortly thereafter. Jack's going to talk about why giving and receiving are so difficult, the importance of balancing the type of feedback that you give, and a hint about a behavior that makes the biggest difference. So Jack, let me turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jill. So I've got the opportunity to talk with you about why this topic is so challenging. I think there are many misconceptions. And just on the screen here, you're going to see a few of some of the misconceptions that I would like to cover with you. There's a conception about, or belief about, there being a kind of feedback that really does, managers believe, thinks that they will really, that people want, but in reality that they don't. There's a kind of feedback that managers believe improves performance, but in fact, it really doesn't. There's a kind of feedback that managers believe is expected of them but it actually seems to cause more negativity and a decline in the performance of their colleagues. There's a kind of feedback that managers choose more because of their personality than because of the situation or what the recipient really needs. So in order for us to talk about this very intelligently with each other, we're going to have some new terms. And I'd like to kind of just review with you some new definitions that will be helpful, I think, in this discussion we'll have. The two terms that I'd like to introduce are the notion of reinforcing feedback and redirecting feedback. By reinforcing feedback, we mean those positive praise, approbation, kudos, all the things that we think of as being reinforcing. And the second kind of feedback that we'll be talking about is a redirecting kind of feedback. Some would call it negative. It's corrective. It's telling someone what they didn't do or what they could do better or what they spent too much money on, or just pointing out all the variety of problems that are occurring with what they've done. So as we think about those two kinds of feedback, let's move on to just a study that we did some time ago, where we asked 9,500 leaders what kind of feedback helped employees the most. And as you see there on the screen, the question that was posed to them was, the thing that would most help employees to improve performance is A, being given specific constructive suggestions, or B, being given regular recognition and praise. And let me just invite you for a moment to take just a quick stab at what's your answer to that question. Which of those two would you choose personally for yourself? And then may I just ask you, if you would, to guess about what do you think the results were of this survey of some 9,500 leaders about what they think would be most helpful to their employees? Let me kind of share with you kind of the results. The responses from 9,500 managers showed that 82% of them thought the answer was A. Only 18% thought the answer was B. So basically, 4 out of 5 managers think that giving constructive, suggestions about how to improve is far more valuable than giving praise and recognition. Which leads me then to kind of summarize what I want to convey with you today. There are a group of erroneous beliefs that have kind of grown up around this topic of feedback. One of those beliefs is that giving feedback is is your duty. And I would say to you, as a manager, giving the kind of feedback that elevates people's performance and creates greater value and elevates their aspirations and makes them feel wanted and as an important contributor, that's your duty. The second misconception is that the best leaders give redirecting feedback, not praise. And we've shared with you some data, and we'll share with you more data that says that's just not the case. The kind of feedback that actually has the most impact on people is the positive kudos, approbation, praise, reinforcement. And the third one is that people really are seeking this. And the fact of the matter is that while on occasion they'll maybe say, yes, I really do want the boss's suggestions and, you know, corrective kind of feedback. In reality, when you do it and you measure the impact it's having, you find out what people really wanted was a selective, occasional, very judicious kinds of suggestions or corrections. But what they really appreciate the most is reinforcement. So this leads us to the next bit of research that I think may be interesting to you. There were a couple of scholars who did a very extensive kind of, it would be described as a meta-analysis. That is they collected all the published data they could find, and they pooled it together, and they analyzed the results from it. And what they found was that in 38% of the cases where feedback was being given to people's colleagues, the consequence was negative. Rather than helping, it really had it detracted from their performance. And so obviously there were a number of cases where they did have some benefit, but it has to be done well. And one of the major areas of focus for the Elevating Feedback program is to help people know how and to possess the skill of being able to give corrective feedback well. We found, published actually last month in the Harvard Business Review, an interesting study by some scholars from a Florida university and the University of Arkansas that really helped to answer the question about why is it that so many managers often prefer to use redirecting or corrective feedback versus those who choose to be, you know, more reinforcing and provide more positive feedback. What you see there in those circles that are on your screen, empathy appears to be the major dividing line. That the leaders who possessed the highest degree of empathy were the ones who were more inclined to give positive feedback. Those with low empathy, who are the least skilled at giving corrective kind of feedback, they were the ones who probably do it the most, which is not a good thing for most organizations. And so when people with high empathy gave corrective feedback, it not only probably didn't have as much of a positive impact as they had hoped, but it actually had a negative impact on them personally. That is, giving corrective, redirecting feedback to one's subordinate not only doesn't probably help them very much, but it also diminishes the performance of the giver. And so the other interesting finding that these scholars kind of published was that as you move up the organization, the degree of empathy seems to decline, seems to be diminishing. So Jill's already mentioned this, but another new research finding that I would want to call your attention to has to do with the importance of leaders asking for feedback and what impact, what effect that has. So let me just highlight the bottom line. When people ask for feedback, whether they're the leader or whether they're an individual contributor in the organization, it causes much more feedback to be occurring, and it is much better received because the person who's asking for it now is expecting the message, and they're geared up for it. When leaders ask for feedback, two very remarkable things happen. One is they're seen as being better givers of feedback to their colleagues. And secondly, they're seen as being a more effective leader overall. It elevates them in the eyes of their subordinates. And so if there's anything you walk away with from today's webinar, we hope that one of them is think about the importance of you asking for feedback. That's, I hope, a takeaway that will be of real benefit to you. Now, let me move on and just talk about, so what are the dangers of a leader giving primarily or only redirecting feedback? What effect does that have? We've already mentioned that in 38% of the cases, we've got some pretty objective research that says it can do harm. So the first thing to recognize is that the redirecting feedback can do damage. And why is that? And I would say to you, first of all, as many managers kind of suspect, it can have the effect of damaging the relationship, which then reduces the amount of effort, the aspirations of the person involved. Corrective measures and corrective messages tend to kind of trigger, some would call it the reptilian part of my brain. So someone criticizes me, I get on the defensive. What's happening? It's that very basic portion of my brain that says, you're being attacked, be ready to fight, be ready to resist. You're being, someone's got harm in mind for you. And so my bloodstream now has more cortisol in it, and it has all kinds of negative kind of emotional and psychological and physiological effects. So just in summary, what's the danger of managers who focus primarily on redirecting or corrective feedback? It negatively impacts very often the giver and the receiver. We've known for some time that when a manager is giving a performance review, that's really a difficult, kind of fairly negative performance review, that he or she is as uncomfortable as the person who is receiving it. It's always interesting to have data coming from other disciplines that tends to confirm what you've been saying. And so we would call your attention to some, I think, fascinating research from a whole different world, not the business world. This is the world of marriage counseling and psychotherapy. There is a very well-known marriage scholar by the name of John Gottman. He acquired a great deal of notoriety because of his ability to, after listening to a few sessions of a married couple's conversations with each other and tallying the number of times that they made positive or negative comments to each other, he could predict with more than a 90% degree of accuracy whether that couple would stay together or that their marriage would come unglued. What he found was that if there was a 5-to-1 ratio of positive, appreciative comments that one partner made to the other, that was a very, very healthy ratio that predicted that marriage would stay happily together. So the implications of what I've just been talking about, let me just summarize it in this way. The implications are that a preference for giving reinforcing feedback generally has the effect on the recipients of them feeling more valued, more appreciated, them performing well. That process seems to then make it more possible for that manager on selective occasions to give some redirecting feedback, to give some suggestions, to give some ideas about what they might not be doing, and have that received really well. It's the positive reinforcing feedback built a bank account that then made any kind of what could be perceived as criticism much more palatable to the individual. So those are the implications of the research that we've done. So Jill, tell us about how this all plays into what ZF has to offer.
Thanks, Jack. And thank you for helping us all remember how important it is to be able to give feedback well and to know which kind of feedback to use at the right time. And so our solution, Elevating Feedback, is built on the same pathway as our other programs that give you an opportunity to define what extraordinary looks like, get some type of measurement, focus on development, and sustain your effort. So let me tell you a little bit about Elevating Feedback. This program helps you understand, you and your participants understand the ideal mix of feedback, teaches leaders what makes a difference, help them see their preferences and the impact of those preferences, provides an easy to use framework so that people can do it well from the moment they leave the class, and provides developmental suggestions that are really specific and helps people improve. The elements of the program include a self-assessment, a track to run on in terms of the fuel model, real play practice versus role play practice, focuses on building capability, and is available in efficient, flexible formats. Wouldn't be a Zenger-Folkman offering without an assessment, and the assessment that goes with this program is a feedback preferences survey that provides insight into the 5 dimensions that includes your confidence and really helps leaders focus on the areas that will make a difference in their development, make a difference in their relationship with their teams. We've also leveraged our foolproof fuel framework from Extraordinary Coach, because as Jack said, if you don't do redirecting feedback well, it can be very damaging. So this conversation guide provides leaders with a tool for having really impactful, meaningful, well-done conversations. And because one of the biggest reasons people don't give reinforcing feedback more often is it just makes them uncomfortable, the program also focuses on building competence and confidence. So that leaders are willing to not only do this more often, but they're confident that they can do it well. The program provides a safe environment and dedicated time for leaders to create a real developmental plan. So it provides structure, the opportunity to apply real relevant situations, and then reminds people in their planning of the balance so that they're going into it very thoughtfully in terms of how often they will practice the different interactions. So if listening to Jack and Jill has inspired you to explore elevating feedback in more detail, please reach out to us because we'd love to have you try the feedback preferences self-assessment and to really talk about how this could apply to your organization. And in order to get the link to the feedback preferences self-assessment, we ask you to complete the exit survey to let us know if today's conversation was useful. Because as we say, feedback is a gift. So if you would go to the address below, bit.ly/ZF-EF-assess, you can give us feedback and in turn have an opportunity to complete the feedback preferences assessment. And I believe Jennifer has also put that link in chat, so you can go to it from there. So thank you. This was a pleasure to talk to you about elevating feedback. And Jack, what last words do you have for the group today?
Just thanks for coming, and we hope that you got some new ideas. I think unlearning old ideas is probably the hardest thing we all do in life. And we hope that we've disabused you of some beliefs that maybe weren't correct. And we've encouraged you to practice the very best kind of feedback with your colleagues. Thanks.